This podcast serves Middle Tennessee every weekday morning, and it's made possible by member support. Learn how you can make a difference at wpln.org/support.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's December 4th, 2025. On this day in 1844, Tennessean James K. Polk was elected president. Well, the actual election day had been about a month prior, but counting votes took a long time back then. This was the day the popular vote tally ended, showing that Polk, the first ever candidate known as a dark horse, had won. It was kind of a shocking victory. Tennesseans were certainly well acquainted with Polk. He'd been governor after all. But although he'd served in Congress for a little while, even been Speaker of the House, he'd never really made the big impact on the national political scene before his election. Not the kind that made the papers anyway. He was considered such an out-of-the-blue candidate that one of the catchphrases used by his opponents in the Whig Party was, "Who is Polk?" I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. James K. Polk got the Democratic Party's nomination because the incumbent, Martin Van Buren, split the vote with two other frontrunners. The convention went through 8 rounds of voting with no clear winner. That's when Polk threw his name in the ring. Van Buren made the surprise decision to back him, and that broke the stalemate. The guy from Murray County was suddenly running for the nation's highest office. Then, in the general election campaign, he strangely managed to garner support by being better at spinning the one big point that both he and the Whig candidate, Henry Clay, agreed on, and that was slavery. It was a hot-button issue, with the North and South at odds over whether new states should allow the use of enslaved labor. Both candidates were Southerners. Both were slaveholders themselves. Clay tried to nuance the matter by spouting one kind of rhetoric in the North and another in the South. But Polk stayed consistent, and he landed on an approach still used today by Confederate apologists and lost cause mythologizers. He glossed things over and sidestepped discussion of the inhumanity of slavery or the fact that the rest of the world was abandoning the practice by painting it as a states' rights issue. And that was enough to make folks comfortable and facilitate changing the topic to something more convenient. One of the things that was quite convenient for Polk was his association with the only man from our state who'd been president before him, Andrew Jackson. Now, they had very different personalities. Polk was as calm and austere as Jackson was fiery. Let me put it this way. I've never heard stories about Polk beating a political rival with his walking stick like Jackson did to John Sevier, or like later President Andrew Johnson did a time or two. Wow. Polk really was the only Tennessee president who didn't need anger management classes. But still, Polk was Jackson's protege all the same. He agreed with Jackson on a lot of policy issues, enough to be nicknamed Young Hickory. One reason Polk's time as Speaker of the House hadn't been a star-making turn was because it was during Jackson's time in the White House, and Polk was overshadowed as he pretty much operated in lockstep with his mentor. But when he ran for president, the association with Jackson told voters a lot about who Polk was at a time when Jackson was a populist hero for a certain brand of American. And so, by an incredibly tight margin, Polk managed to eke out a win, and he became president. I can't help but see some degree of echo in the election that just happened here in Middle Tennessee this week. In the Republican primary for the 7th Congressional District, I think you could call Matt Van Epps the dark horse. I mean, yes, he'd been on Governor Billy's cabinet. But the General Services Department isn't in the news often, so he was one of those commissioners the average voter never hears about. The way candidates and PACs spend on attack ads in that campaign suggests that a lot of people were worried about Republican State Representative Jody Barrett winning the nomination. But Van Epps is the one who pulled through to the finish line with messages that leaned heavy on his military service and an endorsement from President Donald Trump. In the end, that association with Trump is likely the main point that a lot of voters knew about Van Epps when they went to the polls on Tuesday. Not that he shouted MAGA from the rooftops, but when the official messaging is kind of vague, endorsements speak loudly. Van Epps won by a tighter margin than recent Republicans in that area. The race was tight because Afton Bain made huge strides for a Democrat in the 7th District, and she did it by being unapologetically liberal. In the last few decades, Democrats who win big offices in Tennessee, like Congress or the governor's office, have tended to be fairly moderate or centrist. I'm thinking here about folks like Phil Bredesen, Jim Cooper, Lincoln Davis, or Bart Gordon. Bain is cut from a different cloth. And while she didn't win, she got results that have analysts all over the nation talking about this week's special election. Now, there are any number of factors that could have been at play. And I'm sure folks in both parties and at any number of think tanks will be poring over voter turnout numbers and the finer details of local polling results to figure out what the big takeaway really is. But one way or another, this week's results will almost certainly have an impact on next year's campaign strategies as all of the state's congressional seats, yes, including the one Van Up's just won, as well as the governor's office, are all up for grabs. In just a few minutes, a Curious Nashville inquiry about the Grand Ole Opry. That's coming up after the newscast.
You know how important WPLN News has been to you and your family, and you have seen how high-quality local journalism is necessary to a thriving community. You can ensure that this service stays strong and stays available to all of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Join the Producer's Circle with your gift of $100 or more each month and make the bold statement that you support the mission of a more informed and engaged community. Start your philanthropic journey with Nashville Public Radio today at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A group of Tennessee medical professionals is raising concerns about the use of pentobarbital in Tennessee's lethal injections. They're asking Governor Bill Lee to halt all executions until courts finish reviewing the new protocol. That won't be until spring, and the state is scheduled to execute a man named Harold Wayne Nichols next week. The Tennessee Department of Correction announced a switch to a single drug method using pentobarbital last December, and since then has executed 2 men. One of them groaned and said he was in pain as he died. The next execution is scheduled for December 11th. The letter from the medical experts reads in part, quote, "From our clinical experience, pentobarbital is unpredictable when used in isolation and can cause great distress and a prolonged and painful death." 18 medical professionals signed the letter, including experts in cardiology, clinical pharmacy, procedures with IV sedation, and lung care. The lungs are relevant because lethal injection is known to harm the lungs in a way that causes the sensation of drowning. Nashville officials have signed on to a federal lawsuit challenging the Trump administration. At issue are changes to a program that helps unhoused people. Along with Metro, the suit is brought by a group of local governments, including Boston, Tucson, and San Francisco, and a coalition of nonprofit groups. They say the federal government's Continuum of Care program is an important resource for providing permanent housing to a range of people, including veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities. They say the Department of Housing and Urban Development made sudden changes last month that could throw the entire program into chaos. Republican Matt Van Epps narrowly won Tennessee's 7th congressional seat Tuesday, but both parties are celebrating. WPLN's Mariana Bacchiao reports on why and what the numbers can tell us.
All 14 counties swung further left from last year in a district drawn to dilute Nashville's voting power. Voter turnout could account for some of that shift. Democratic voters tend to be more motivated to turn out to the polls in off-season elections. But overall, turnout was on par with the 2022 midterm elections, when the margins were much wider. The Democrat in that race lost by 22 points. In this contest, State Representative Afton Bain lost by just under 9 points. A single-digit loss in a Republican stronghold has Democrats optimistic about their chances next year, when all 3 congressional districts that include left-leaning Nashville will be on the ballot. Mariana Bacchiao, WPLN News.
Lee Beeman, the former Nashville car dealership owner nominated by President Trump to TVA's board of directors, faced questions yesterday in Washington. Beeman appeared before the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, where he promised to oppose privatizing the federal utility. The committee must approve nominees before they go up for a full Senate vote. Several seats on the TVA board have not been filled for months after Trump fired multiple members picked during the Biden administration. The Chattanooga Times-Free Press reports Democrats on the committee pressed Lee about his ties to Republican politicians, including Congressman Andy Ogles. Beeman served a few years ago as treasurer for Ogles, whose campaign finances have since faced scrutiny. Senators also raised allegations of abuse leveled against Beeman by his 4th wife in 2018. Nashville-based HCA Healthcare hit a record stock price last week at $515. And in the days since, it has remained high, soaring over last year, says Becker's Hospital Review. The company has had a great year so far. Revenue for the third quarter was up nearly $2 billion compared to the year before. Patient visits are also up. HCA is the largest hospital chain in the nation, with nearly 200 hospitals, and it's continuing to grow its footprint. This year, it acquired facilities in New Hampshire and Florida. Forbes reports that most of HCA's facilities are either general or acute care hospitals, which puts the company in a good position to care for the country's aging population. According to federal data, costs for adults over 85 are about 8 times higher than they are for kids. One night, legendary doorman Dave Knoll was sitting on the back steps of the OG basement complaining about all the musical tribute shows in Nashville. You know, the ones where multiple musicians play the music of one artist. Dave's buddy asked him, "What tribute show would you actually pay to see?" Knoll said, "Tom Waits." Justin Barney has the rest of the story.
Tom Waits isn't for everyone. One critic described Waits' voice as soaked in a vat of bourbon, left hanging in a smokehouse for a few hours, and then taken outside and run over with a car. And yet, Get Behind the Mule, a Tom Waits tribute, has been a hit. It's about to hit its 20th year. And even though the tribute hasn't even happened, it's tomorrow, the event has already raised $20,000. All of that money will go to Second Harvest Food Bank. Allison Gower, diehard Tom Waits fan first, event organizer second, says that the money is really impactful.
Every dollar is equivalent to 4 meals, if my math, which is poor, is 80,000 meals.
Feeding those in need is the core meaning of Get Behind the Mule, a reference to a Tom Waits song, which is inspired by bluesman Robert Johnson's dad,
who was trying to encourage his children to participate in sharecropping and saying, like, get behind the mule. This is about community. Get behind the mule. This is about feeding ourselves and feeding our people.
Got to get behind the mule, yeah, in the morning. Get behind the mule, yeah, in the morning and cloud. You got to get behind the mule.
Justin Barney, WPLN.
Get Behind the Mule will feature 11 performers, all playing Tom Waits songs, tomorrow night at the 5 spot. An American soldier who died during the Korean War has been identified 75 years later. U.S. Army Corporal George Hagee of Kingsport, Tennessee, was reported killed in December 1950. He was 18 years old. Because there were no indications that he was a prisoner of war, Hagee was declared killed in action. 4 years later, Hagee's remains were turned over to the U.S. by North Korea as part of an agreement between the two countries. But at the time, the remains could not be linked to anyone, and they were declared non-recoverable. The unknown remains were then buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii. Decades later, the Defense Department exhumed hundreds of unidentified remains and sent them for more advanced DNA testing. Hagee's family was recently notified, allowing his identity to become public. He'll be buried in Johnson City next May.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org.
It's been hard to miss that the Grand Ole Opry just turned 100 years old. But for the average music fan, there are still parts of the Opry that raise questions. Some came into our Curious Nashville project asking, what does it take for a musician to become a member of the Opry? WPLN's Blake Farmer and Julie Height took up this question on This Is Nashville, along with WMOT editorial director Craig Havikhurst, to bring you the answer.
Let's break this apart. What does it mean to be a member of the Opry?
There was a time, certainly decades back, when Opry membership was something that was seen as really essential to helping an artist advance their career in country music. I mean, people wanted to come be on the show, and they might well get their first national exposure. I mean, it was really a star-making kind of platform. The industry has moved in a different direction than the Opry in many ways. It means now taking part in this ongoing, unbroken lineage. So it is it is an honor to be a member, and there's now ceremony around it that didn't exist way, way back. I mean, it is, there's this invitation and there's the induction, and it is so much more of a ceremonial thing.
Well, what about, Craig, the requirements for you performing? Are you signing up to say, yeah, I'll be there a certain number of times?
Yeah, in the early days, the artists wouldn't have been anywhere else but there Saturday night. So they didn't need to have a requirement. Over time, I'd say probably way into the 70s, 80s, then the tours began to be bigger, and it was more of a choice to have to be in Nashville versus to be on a big stage in Oklahoma or someplace else. So
right.
the tension, and then as they became big stars in the late 90s, it really became more of a source of tension. And the Opry would have to go, hey, Artist X, we know you're making bank out there on the road, but you do need to come back and there were some contractual obligations, or at least informal understandings, that you do X number of shows per year. And then some other stars have been so passionately interested. Carrie Underwood comes to mind as somebody they didn't really, is there as often as she can be, wants to be there.
Wow. Well, all right, Julie, to be a member, do you have to have been a hit maker?
Not necessarily, especially these days. I mean, I did a little audit of the members who've been inducted from 2020 to now, 21 of them. And really the vast majority are not in their hit-making era. Some of them have never had a hit-making era. I mean, there are veteran artists who've been inducted, but the mindset, the philosophy is really different these days.
So you talked to Opry's associate producer, Gina Keltner. She kind of used this word relationship a lot. Let's take a listen.
I think in most cases, the ones who really rise to the top for us as far as our relationships are ones who are familiar with the Opry, who do understand its importance, and early on it was important to them to be here and to establish a relationship. I'll use Carly Pierce as an example. Carly, very early on, she would do the Opry, and then the next day email me and say, okay, I'm ready to book the next one.
We're hearing there what it takes. You're in a relationship with the Opry. What does that mean? Is there criteria for becoming on the Opry? Or is it almost like waiting for your partner to pop the question?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Gina Keltner mentioned the name Carly Pierce. And that's one example of a newer artist that they were, building a relationship with as Carly Pierce was rising to where she is. So it's not that they're not paying attention to new talent. They very much are, but there's so much more of that kind of the abstract stuff. I mean, it's so much more abstract than chart metrics. When you think about someone demonstrating that this is meaningful to them, making it a point to be there, performing over and over again as a guest, that kind of laying of the groundwork.
All right, so Craig, we've got accomplishment, relationship, connection, commitment. I don't know, has the criteria for membership always been this reverential?
I would think so. I would say so. And I think that one of the kind of barometers of that I've been thinking of as I listen to Julie is that younger, developing, what we would consider Americana or alternative country, not aiming for the mainstream radio, there's never been a period where being able to be invited to play on the Opry or heaven, hope, be a member was uncool. These artists who are in our kind of, roots world, they still regard it as the epitome of cool.
You can find more questions and answers at curious.wpln.org. And if you're wondering about something, there's an inbox on that page to send us your query. Well, we do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.